Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I've been an American Civil War reenactor for a few years now. On the authentic side mostly, but I hit a mainstream event on the occasion. I've heard plenty of spooky stories from mainstreamer 60-year-old beer gut bastards and didn't believe any of that shit. Still don't for the most part because you never trust farbs. However, the following events occurred the weekend myself, and 8 other guys did a living history at Port Hudson to get our Park Service training to fire cannons. We were really hyped the whole week leading up to it because there is this big-ass siege weapon on the park that is still entirely functional, and we were all game to fire that. Most of us are fairly young guys, and this was in 2018. For a bit of background, Port Hudson was the site of a ton of suffering. When Fort Desperate was under siege, soldiers were recorded to have crawled from place to place, conserving energy as they lived on around 1,800 calories per man per week. An entire federal regiment suffered a 100% death count, trying to overtake the 39th Mississippi Redoubt. On the last night of the living history, 7 of us decided we were going to go up to Fort Desperate because yeah, why not? 2 of our guys, Peacock and Affleck, wound up going back to camp to get Peacock's glasses halfway across the battleground cause man can't see worth shit. Me, Cow, Mittens, Peaches, and Popper head up to the fort, expecting the others to catch up later. The actual fort is pretty much gone. There's this big modern boardwalk set up over the earthworks where a lot of shit happened, and a big-ass period-correct watchtower lit up by floodlights. It's the only artificial light up there and doesn't do shit for the darkness. Messed up our light adjustment. We got on the boardwalk and walked to this pavilion thing that held information about the fort, but we had no lights, so it was just dark. Peaches decided that we needed to take a moment of silence for the boys on both sides, so we doffed our hats and kepis for a few minutes. Not long after we recovered, we heard footfalls coming up the trail to the fort and figured it was Affleck and Peacock. We were right. And Mittens thought we should go scare them. I'd say Mittens is my partner in crime. Guy gets me to do a lot of wild shit. Oftentimes at events you'll find our asses carrying around a knitted sock fixed to a bayonet yelling about a dude named Gary and the one true way of preference. Naturally, Mittens and I made our way down to the watchtower and were about to ambush the latecomers when we heard this god-awful scream. I don't think I'll ever forget that shit. It sounded uncannily like a man getting his insides rearranged by a bayonet. We heard Peacock curse like a sailor, and the 2 started running. Those assholes were waiting to spook us. If the boardwalk were north, then the scream sounded off to the east. Mittens and I aren't casually spooked, and knew the boardwalk extended in that direction. We figured it was Popper trying to screw with us and decided to act freaked out and run up the boardwalk. Tomfuckery ensued. When we got up the boardwalk, we couldn't see anyone up there, and were kind of frustrated but didn't drop our act. There's a bit of the boardwalk park staff used to get onto the earthworks, so we figured the bastards were under us, so we continued to freak out a bit as time passed, so we started bad-mouthing them to get a rise. Talking about Cow's rotundity, Peaches' favorite song is Ave Maria, and that he cried on the way from Gettysburg because Mittens flashed his asshole at that family on the way up there. Shit like that. Popper stomped out of the pavilion, and Mittens fell on his ass. Popper said something about that scream being a nice try, and I suddenly noticed how cold it was. When we came to the conclusion that none of us made the scream, swearing on my skin, we were kind of shook up. We agreed that shit wasn't a panther. Panthers sound like women, and the scream was certainly that of a man. It was getting colder, and I didn't notice it until later on, but it was getting darker. We all stood out there trying to address whatever the hell was out there. The other 2 guys that stayed at camp couldn't have been over there because Tampon was older than all of us and was charged with watching Antietam, whom I had given a concussion during our grappling tourney earlier that afternoon, and frankly has 2 or 3 brain cells in all reality. Affleck and Peacock were on the trail probably 20 yards in front of Mittens and I and bolted from the scream. After that, there shouldn't have been anyone else on the property. Cow's dad worked at a neighboring historical park and told us that after hours we would be completely alone. What the hell, ghosts don't exist, monsters don't exist. Sonic 06 doesn't exist, it was really cold. We could see shadows in the watchtower lights like someone was walking along them. That was when Popper got a bright idea. He said he wanted to try something and had us all go sit in the pavilion. Popper was a real stoner at that time and figured himself some kind of spiritual dude. He took to pacing up and down the boardwalk in our field of vision and began asking questions aloud, addressing the boys who had defended the fort to their deaths. He took brief pauses in between questions like he was listening for answers. After a while, he made a statement. "I'm wearing a frock coat. I know some of you boys like these. It's pretty nice. If you want, you could touch it." Mittens whispered a good, "What the fuck" under his breath because Popper was wearing his frock. For all he knew, the man could have been inviting demons to live in Mittens' coat for all eternity. Bastard should have stopped there, but he kept asking questions. This time they were more personal. He asked about their feelings about the war and the nature of the deaths. Peaches told me later that the shadow down by the watchtower had turned into 3 at this point, but I wasn't looking over there. I was focused on Popper. The man is one of my closest friends, but every time he asked a question after the frock statement, I felt a plethora of emotions rise and fall within me. I could not audibly hear the answers, but they raced through my mind, hundreds of them for every question he asked. It was nearly overwhelming, but I kept my mouth shut. It was so cold and dark at this point that we couldn't see each other. Cow and I sat pressed against each other, and one wall while Mittens and Peaches sat against the other, but we were all quite close to the corner that joined them together. Popper was now boasting about his kepi, an undyed jean cloth one made fairly accurate to the one it was based on. I had mine, a Columbus Depot made by the most reputable hat makers in the hobby, hanging off my knee. Tampon had given it to me as a gift for the progress I had made in the group. Popper asked if they wanted to touch his hat. For the first time, I didn't feel the responses within me, but I did feel the hat jerk as if someone grabbed the brim. Peaches then yelled to his right, "Mittens, don't fucking touch my ear." Mittens replied from Peaches' left that he didn't touch shit. I started feeling awful, like a bowling ball was in my stomach. That's what I normally feel after I've had a seizure, only I hadn't had one. Popper asked one more question, something about coffee. Apparently, dead Civil War soldiers felt strongly about coffee, because I felt the most atrocious rage well up inside me. Anger that I had never felt before. It wasn't my own. Everything sounded like I was wearing earmuffs, and I started to get up with great haste. I don't know why, but if I didn't fall immediately after and seize out, I would have strangled Popper for those bastards. The next thing I remember after that was Popper and Peaches holding me up. We were on the trail and had stopped moving for Mittens to vomit. After he got all that shit out, we went back to camp. I had insisted that the entire way back we marched in step, and as we did, it felt like they were marching with us. When we got back to camp, I told them everything from my point of view. It took a while for me to explain. I was still processing that shit. The others talked about the shadows, especially the one that walked behind Popper as he paced, and Popper divulged he had seen orbs floating off in the direction the scream came from. I was the newest to the hobby at that point, and hadn't been told about Johnny Camper. Tampon said something about it to Cow and Popper, and they had my leg tied to Mittens for the night. I'm still pretty active in the hobby. I just refused to go to Fort Desperate after dark. Correction, I don't know why I said that watchtower was period correct. The dark must have really screwed with me. This photo was taken in 2011 by the park. Pretty sure it's a different color now though, and the lights weren't put up yet.
I always wondered, would the spirit of a Civil War soldier be thrilled that his image lives on after so long, or eternally pissed that what he fought and died horribly for is just being LARPed by a bunch of new Americans with like 10 to 15 points higher BMI than he had? Also, to add, I don't mean that question to sound disrespectful. I pretty much just mean, do you think Civil War soldiers would find it honorable or depressing?
I honestly have mixed feelings about it. The point of it all is to honor the men and boys on both sides and to demonstrate to the general public how shitty it is that we allowed our country to divide so horrifically, that we killed hundreds of thousands of each other. But the old-ass dudes that everyone sees wearing polyester bullshit and putting up tents at events where the real guys shivered away with a ground cloth and a blanket is like spitting on it all to me. I'd say they'd be dismayed at that side of the hobby, misrepresented and honestly disrespected. However, we are making big changes. My side of the hobby are campaigners, young guys in the age range of the men and boys who fought. We try to get everything right to a T and do pretty damn well. I think once we get it fully authentic and accurate, we'll have a whole hobby that honors them and the public rather than just several groups doing it right amidst a massive failure.
The year was 1978, late October. I was 12 years old. 3 kids and I, 2 of them younger than me, one was a year older, were walking down a trail alongside a bean field near our neighborhood near Oklahoma City. We were looking for used shotgun shells, as we would collect them as kids, so we were looking at the ground most of the time as we were walking along. We were getting close to the line of woods that surrounded the bean field. I heard one of the other kids let out a scream and take off running right past me as fast as he could. I had my back turned to whatever he was running from. As I turned around to see what he was so scared of, the other 2 kids raced by me yelling for me to run. They were crying and had a look of fear on their faces. Standing about 25 to 30 feet away from me was a headless man. This man or figure was about 6'3" or so and was wearing a belt of bullets, bandolier. The type of bullet belt that crosses over your shoulder, like the ones from the old movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The figure had some type of uniform on. It looked like an old Civil War uniform, a blue jacket and a white collar around his neck, and again he had no head. The figure wore black boots up to his knees. I didn't see a gun or a weapon of any kind. I froze for about 5 seconds as I was looking at this figure, right before I turned to run from this thing. The figure raised its hand and pointed a finger at me. As I looked very closely at this figure's hand, I noticed it was snow white in color. The color was so white, like he dipped his hand in a bucket of flour. I took off running into the woods and met another one of the kids, who was hiding from this figure. We sat there and watched as this figure walked down along the trail next to the bean field. It walked into the woods, across from where we were hiding, never to be seen again. I ran home and told my dad what I had seen. We went back and found footprints in the dirt where we had seen the figure walk. This area was the woods where I grew up and loved being out there. I still go back to this day to walk around. We would ride dirt bikes and play games in these woods, and older kids would have parties, campfires, and other stuff. I never saw anything like that again, but I didn't go back again that fall. This is a true story and I don't know what we saw. Maybe someone was playing a trick on us, but if so, they went into a great amount of detail to do it.
I used to live in Shelbyville, Kentucky. My mother and I lived together in a small ranch house. My grandparents lived just up the road. They ran a bed and breakfast together. It's called the Yellow Carriage House if you want to look it up or if you live close by. Anyway, my mother was going through medical school at the time, so I spent weeks at a time at the bed and breakfast. During these visits, the house became a second home for me. Soon, however, I started to notice things that nobody would talk about. Objects would disappear before reappearing seemingly out of nowhere. The dogs would begin to bark wildly at a wall or an empty room for minutes or even hours at a time. This continued for a while and eventually I thought nothing of it. That is, until I started to see dark figures in the corner of my eye. Soon they became more material and noticeable. Instead of just being in the corners of my vision, they would appear dead ahead of me. They mostly stood with their back turned to me, as if they were standing watch over something. However, sometimes they would stand facing me, staring into my eyes blankly. The spirits all wore gray coats and trousers with dark leather belts, as well as a gray wool cap. I saw the spirits for a while before I told anyone, but my family ignored me. My mother claimed that I was imagining things, and my grandmother straight up ignored my questioning. This continued for years, until one day I was walking into the living room when I saw a spirit behind me. This had never happened before. Before I knew it, I was being dragged across the floor to the basement door, stopping just before the door, and then the spirit vanished. It was about 2 years after the incident when my grandmother finally explained who the spirits are. She said this: during the Civil War, a group of African American Confederate soldiers were tasked with herding cattle through the woods of Shelbyville. All was going well before they were ambushed by the Union. The Union men spooked the cattle, and the Confederate men were trampled and left half dead in the woods, marooned by the very men fighting for their freedom. Over time, the bodies were buried and forgotten. That is, until the basement of the house was constructed, During the excavation process, several bodies were uncovered, as well as several Civil War relics. She then tells me that she knows this because the spirits told her so, claiming that she had seen them almost every day since she moved in. My father also told me a story about how when I was an infant, the soldiers would watch over my crib. Now I have to say that this is a true story. I am not making this up. This is a real place, and the ghosts there are real. If you live in Shelbyville, I would love to hear your input. Furthermore, if you have stayed at this bed and breakfast, have you seen them? Because I know they have seen you.
So I am pretty shit at Greentext. But I have a story, and I hope my fellow Georgia Anons will share theirs as well. Alright, so this happened about a year ago at a Civil War reenactment. It was around 12, and me and my buddies were getting ready to hunker down for bed at the officer barracks in the fort. I am tossing and turning, trying to get to sleep, and right when I am about to get comfy and fall asleep, I get a sudden feeling that I should look at the fireplace. And when I do, I see a white figure in a dress up to the waist and her left arm cut off at the elbow. At first I cope and say, oh, it's just the fire reflecting off the curtains. So I close my eyes again until I realize, oh, we put out the fire. At this point I try ignoring it. Evidently it did not like this because I felt a sharp jab in my ear, the one that was on the pillow. At this point I am fully awake and scream. I wake my friends up. They are understandably pissed off because at this point it is like 1 a.m. I tell them I'll be back in the morning and drive 45 minutes to my house. I am still in my night clothing and nightcap. I didn't even bother to put on pants or shoes, I hauled ass. Pick related, that's the officer barracks.
Being a native Virginian in Civil War country, I have been lucky to have a few encounters, and this is my favorite. It was the fall of 1988. I was driving in the northern part of Fauquier County, Virginia, approximately 45 minutes outside of Upper Ville. I was in a very remote area where the hills rolled gently, and there were no homes, barns, fences, riding trails, or other motorists. I was really enjoying the scenery when I drove around a curve, and there on the left side of the road, about half a mile ahead, was a horse with a rider. This is pretty common in Fauquier County, but this was a bit different. Again, I was in the middle of nowhere. Once I drove closer to the horse and rider, I noticed what the gentleman was wearing, a full Confederate uniform with sleeve markings indicating a high-rank officer. His uniform consisted of the gray and color pants, jacket, and full belt dressing with sword, a sidearm, black hat, riding gloves, and riding boots. As I drove past slowly, I waved and he tilted his hat. I will never forget the expression on his face. It was one of confusion and interest. Being a Civil War enthusiast, I was very surprised and enjoyed the sight. This person and his horse seemed as real as I am. I could not understand why someone would be dressed in this fashion in the middle of nowhere. He appeared to be dirty enough for me to notice from about 20 feet away. His beard looked unkempt, and his hair was longer than the hat would cover. That's when I decided it must be a ghost. This is the only thing that is logical to me. Once I found a place to make a U-turn, I drove back and there was no trace of the person. Please give me your opinions and views on this sighting. This occurred in the middle of the week. My day off at the time was Wednesday. Weather was cool and clear. As mentioned before, I am a Civil War enthusiast and enjoy learning of the courage and bravery of the Civil War period. With respect to landowners and the past, I have relic hunted in the past. This encounter occurred in January 1993 in Fauquier County, Virginia. My hunting partner and I obtained permission to relic hunt this particular field for one day only. The temperature was 18 degrees on Sunday morning, and we had to hunt that day regardless. With a heavy frost on the ground, we started hunting for relics at around 7 a.m. We headed off in opposite directions so the machines would not interfere with each other. A while into the hunt, I was finding some nice Confederate relics, as was my friend. As a general rule of thumb, before digging a hole, I look around in order to prevent any practical jokes, such as being pecked on the shoulder with a long stick and being scared. Well, I started digging a hole and wham! Something hits me on my right ear, knocking my headphones and 2 hats off my head. The impact was enough for me to see stars. Once I regained my composure, after 30 or 45 seconds, I jumped up ready to hand my friend some choice words, and he was about 200 yards from me with his back toward me. So I made the short trip to him and asked what the hell he was trying to do. He was ignorant of my situation. We traced my steps back in the frosted field to examine the area for an explanation. We did not observe any other footprints around my location, nor did we find any objects that could have been thrown. The nearest area where a person could have hidden was about 100 yards away in the direction of the impact. We concluded birds of prey do not have young that time of year, so they were not protecting young, and there were no feathers left behind from a hard impact. So our deduction is that an upset soldier not wanting me in his area gave me a little attention. The item I was trying to retrieve at the time was an experimental exploding rifle mini-ball, which is still my favorite artifact due to this story. After many years of analyzing the encounter, I still believe someone was trying to get a message across.
This took place in the early 90s, and I don't do it so much anymore. I used to have a Dodge van, and on vacation time I would always throw a futon in the back of it, a sleeping bag, my Coleman camping stuff, and I'd hit the road for 2 or 3 weeks and go visit places. One trip I went back east. I'm from back east. I'm from Ohio, and I've been in Monterey now for the last 40 years. And I visited Civil War battlefields, Antietam, Gettysburg, Harper's Ferry, and on one trip I went up to see Custer's Mountain up there in Montana. And where it is, it's up there in the prairies, and it's surrounded by a lot of mountains. It is small. It's on the intersection of State 90 and U.S. Route 212, which goes east and west. It's a little east of Billings, Montana. And 212 starts at 90 and runs right behind Custer's Hill and goes to Spearfish, Sturgis, Deadwood, that part of the country. Anyway, so I've been on the road for 4 or 5 days already on this trip, and I'm tired and I need to take a shower or jump in a river someplace. I get to the park at 8 o'clock at night. It's already closed, so I'm not going to go in and see the monument that night. I was also really hungry. Now down where this was at is this little general store that has a cafe in it. So I pulled in the parking lot right there, and they were getting ready to close. It was this guy and his wife, and the guy was a retired park ranger who used to take out tours of the monument, and he knew it really well. And his wife was Native American, and she lived there with her whole family for generations. And after the battle, the Native Americans just didn't go away. They all still live around there in the following generations. Anyway, they made me something to eat, and I asked them if they happened to have a beer I could drink, and they said no. They said go up the road a couple miles to this little town called Crow Agency, buy a 12-pack, bring it back, and we'll help you drink it. So I did that. I went up there and got a 12-pack, and I brought it back, and for the next couple hours they told me the true story of Custer's battle. And it was really riveting. Parts of the story you never heard of. It wasn't like Errol Flynn dying on the hill like in the movies. It was a long, drawn-out battle, and it was multifaceted. There were other parts of the battle, other sections of the battle. Anyway, they were getting ready to close up. They had to go home. I asked them if I could camp out in their parking lot. They said no, I couldn't do that, but there is a little access road off Route 212 about a mile down the road, and it's a dirt road, and due to maintenance of the park, you can pull into that spot, and nobody will bother you. I said, that's great. I went down the road. I found the spot, backed into it, and turned off the van. It was dark, starry, and it was quiet, and it was just out here in the prairies. It wasn't eerie at all, it was just neat, right? And it was dark, and it was starry. So I rolled back into my sleeping bag, and I went to sleep, and I was out like a light. So it must have been a couple hours later. I'm sleeping. I guess I'm sleeping. Maybe I'm dreaming. I'm hearing this noise back of my mind, small, ethereal. I hear men shouting. I'm hearing horses. I'm hearing gunshots. I'm laying there thinking I gotta be dreaming this. You know how you're in REM sleep, you can't move, right? And it comes and it's going and it's fading and it's coming back and it's getting louder. Now I'm waking up and I'm hearing this. You know how you wake up to a bad dream and you go, oh my God, that was a bad dream, and it goes away? This didn't go away. It's getting louder. I'm hearing this. I'm looking at my hands. I'm awake. I'm hearing this. What is this? I throw open the side doors of the van. I jump out and there's nothing. There's nothing. It's dark. It's starry and a little cool, and it's still going on. Horses and gunshots and men. I'm hearing this. Then it just started fading away. And then it was gone. The whole episode probably lasted 3 minutes. The whole rest of the night, I crawled back in the van. I sat there wrapped in my sleeping bag, completely spooked. The next day I went and visited the park, and then I left, but that night it was weird.
I have a personal one. Be me. Be Green Beret, 18E. Be sent to Fort Sill for training with artillery in the dead of winter. Stay at an old sanitarium that's been changed into barracks. Across the street is a Civil War-era graveyard. Staying in a room with 2 of my teammates on the 3rd story of the building. Friend is dating a medic and always FaceTimes her while I'm trying to sleep. 2 or 3 a.m. rolls around and my friend finally gets off the phone and falls asleep. Other teammate is playing something on his phone. Suddenly bathroom light turns on and the sleeping dude starts blood-curdling, screaming at the top of his lungs while thrashing in his sleep. WTF.XML. Other friend looks at me and is like, WTF, finger tapping on the window. We both snap to look at it, nothing. Next morning, I'm just gonna stop the Greentext here. We wake up and ask the screaming friend what his malfunction was. He doesn't remember anything but some PTSD nightmare about a hanging Civil War-era soldier handing in the closet. Jokingly, we look in the closet and see painted crosses with nail polish. About an hour later, a team leader knocks on the door and asks us about weird shit happening. We mention the screaming and the tapping in the windows. He says he had the tapping too. Footprints in the snow from the edge of the catwalk to my window and to our team leader's window. The prints are boots, but have no noticeable tread pattern like cowboy or old military boots. Windows are all sealed. Fire exit is a ladder and is in the up position, not touching the catwalk below us, and the fire exit doors are secured with an alarm system. I used to have pictures of the crosses, but my phone broke on a field op. Pic related the barracks. It is a Marine detachment barracks, yellow-tan one also.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.